Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, Maria Garcia Santillana Linares. Maria, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
For the past 10 years, your team has made a list of the most notable career crashes in the past year, and this year you're making it a little bit different. You have an additional roundup. You've gathered a list of the biggest career comebacks of 2024, but before we get into the list, can you give us a little bit of insight of what inspired you to create it?
Yeah, this year we've seen a lot of kind of big names that had been disgraced in the past. So I think the big idea, right, is Elon Musk. He's been kind of the staple of our career crashes list for the past 2 years almost, just because of big leadership decisions, starting with his acquisition of Twitter, now X. And we realized that, these people that we tend to deem as a career crash are really coming back into the limelight and gaining a lot of political power or just business power, right? I do think a lot of it has to be associated with the election of President Donald Trump and his kind of like pull of a lot of businessmen into not only, the billionaires and the business mind, but also political power, which I think is new. And so we're really seeing kind of that pro-Trump association lift. The stock market has also been doing pretty, decent this year, and it's uplifted a number of industries that I think has bumped a couple of people on our list from, either a crash or just like relatively unknown fame into this position of like, hey, we are now a name that you're getting recognized, that your career really is kind of on the upstart, and that you're becoming a household name in the majority of houses in America.
And perhaps the biggest arc of this, who's number one on your list, is Donald Trump. So let's start there. And let's rewind first to January of 2021. He left office, and he left in a disgraced way. He was freshly impeached. He didn't even show up to Joe Biden's inauguration. And then everyone thought his political career was dead in the water. Now, looking back in November, he was elected. He won the popular vote. He also won the Electoral College. So can you tell us a little bit about Trump's past crashes and how he turned around to become now the president-elect?
Yeah, so Trump's a really interesting case because he's a man that's, I would say, like not uncomfortable or not unfamiliar with the concept of a career crash and then a comeback. His businesses have filed for bankruptcy over at least 4 times in the 1990s and early 2000s, and he's been kind of vocal about saying like, hey, this is a process that's available for businesses, specifically Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It's a process that allows these companies to kind of keep running while their debts are paused in a way to restructure and say, okay, how can we get this running? So he's very familiar with the idea of like, hey, if I fall, I can still make it back up, right? And as you mentioned, right, he left office disgraced. The big kind of point that stood out to me is that he was drowning in debt while that was happening. And, he still managed to climb up to the top to raise the funds personally and also on a political level to gain back that political power to be elected, to be our president come January 20th.
And now I want to talk about a name that you mentioned earlier in the conversation that really has moved into the political space. And we saw him be a huge force, especially in the budget negotiations of last week. And that is Elon Musk. So let's talk about him. He joined President-elect Donald Trump on his road to the White House. How did he make his comeback this year?
Yeah, so Elon Musk is today, I think, the richest man in the world. He's the first person to cross $400 billion in net worth. And so just from a purely like monetary perspective, he's definitely up there, right? We can't really talk about who is influential without mentioning his name. A lot of that has to do with the performance of his companies. So Tesla is up 70% this year. He has a 54% estimated in a startup called XAI. All of that has led to $150 billion jump in wealth. That, I think, alongside his just close association with Donald Trump, he donated millions of dollars, about 200 million, to get him elected, has really kind of put him on the top spot. And so, when we looked in the past years at, failures of leadership, not failing to, pay out bonuses, a lot of kind of messy complications about who was going to be the CEO of X when he first bought that. He got sued over not wanting to pay the initial amount that he'd publicly stated he would. It all comes to show that despite all of those leadership failures, he still managed to kind of make his way to the top by associating with the right people, right? I think that's another argument whether you can decouple Trump's growth with Elon Musk's growth, but they're definitely tied together.
So now let's switch from politics to business. And there are two comebacks coming from the retail industry. Who are they? Can you talk a little bit about their stories?
Yeah, so first of all, we have Fran Horowitz. She's the only woman on our list, which I think is really interesting. And I think her comeback is also a lot of the company comeback. You know, we kind of debated a little bit internally whether she is a true comeback or she's just kind of sparking out. You know, Abercrombie and Fitch, the company of which she's the CEO of, has had kind of like an embattled history. At one point, it was called the worst company in America. Former CEO is also now, you know, dealing with charges of, I believe, sex trafficking and interstate prostitution. So from a PR perspective, the company was not doing so well, right? When Fran Horowitz took over, you know, the stock took an all-time low of $10 per share. Now it's at 149. She's you know, taken new line launches. They started a wedding dress business this year. Just in the last year, the stock has jumped 60%. A lot to do by kind of her initiatives. She started as kind of president and chief of merchandising, and then got, you know, brought up or bumped up to the CEO level. And the company has been performing, I would say, like incredibly. You know, we said 60% this year, but since last year, it's been a 500% growth. And a lot of that has to do with her leadership. So she's really been kind of spearheading the growth of Abercrombie up.
And aside from Fran Horowitz, who is the other leader who's making the comeback in the retail space?
Yes, then we have John Galliano, which is like retail and fashion. And his kind of comeback story is also industry. He's kind of, you know, a lot of what we think about when we make this list is what is the fall and then when is the up and up. His fall really was when he left Christian Dior in 2011, in a very kind of scandalous way, you know, in the middle of Paris Fashion Week. The press release went out that he was going to be leaving because of some anti-Semitic remarks that he made, and it was a huge thing. He, you know, started at Maison Margiela, where he currently, or you know, will be soon departing, but he currently is the creative director in 2014, and that kind of really started his up and up. You know, he's been kind of well known, and I would say been having a comeback over the last 10 years, but really this moment of like shine was the beginning of this year in their one of their collections, the artisanal show that really kind of took the internet over. Storm was lauded as, you know, his best collection, and he just recently announced that he's stepping down as creative director. But I think again, when we look at the bottom and then the top, he's credited for creating, you know, the tabby shoes that really sparked internet fame, even starting, you know, an internet meme over finding men who like were stealing tabby shoes. And so, you know, we don't know what he's going to do next as of now. But I would say that he's really, you know, when you look at how he left Dior and how he's leaving Maison Margiela, it's a clear comeback.
And what about other industries like fintech and crypto?
Yeah, so fintech and crypto have also had a very interesting year. I'll start with crypto, just because, you know, we've seen Bitcoin hit the $100,000 mark, and that's really brought one particular person, Michael Saylor, into kind of the limelight. He's the founder and CEO of this company called MicroStrategy. It's a software company, but for a really long time, it's just kind of been seen as a Bitcoin proxy, right? They're one of the largest, if not the largest, institutional holders of Bitcoin with 439,000 coins. It's worth approximately 44 billion. And so they've really benefited, and him in particular has really benefited from this up and up. I think, you know, his comeback is really one of, okay, you know, when crypto's doing well, he's doing well, but when crypto's doing bad, no one really likes to pay attention to Michael Saylor. And I think this year, you know, we've seen his wealth double to I think about, you know, 8.7 billion. Earlier in the year, he was worth 4 billion. And so he's really had that, I would say, comeback in seriousness and how people are taking him. And, you know, MicroStrategy also was included in some very staple, you know, indexes that have helped, I think, the credibility of the company and hence his credibility. So that's on the crypto side. On the fintech side, I think we have an idea of, you know, like a quick rise and a quick fall within the year. And so, you know, it's something that my colleagues here at Forbes really documented very well, the fall of this company, Synapse, banking as a service. So what essentially they do is they act as a middleman for fintechs to serve in the middle. The CEO, Sankeet Pathak of Synapse, you know, it's this company that went bankrupt this year. It'd been already, you know, struggling for a little bit over a year. Since 2023 is when the reports first started coming out that it was losing customers. It had, you know, holes in its balance sheet. And then finally this year it filed for Chapter, I believe, 11 also protection. And there was some discussion over that. But in March, the CEO, Sankeet Pathak, was ousted. You know, the judge said, hey, we're going to put someone else in here, you're out. So that's in March. By August, he'd already raised $11 million in terms for new funding for a new company. So I think that really goes to show, right? It's something that people also mentioned about Donald Trump. People are investing in personalities when it comes to these comebacks and these businesses. So it doesn't matter if your company fails, goes bankrupt, however many million of people are left. Being money specifically in the case of Synapse, he's, going on, raised 11 million to found a robotics startup. So, that again, if we want to take the big story of like a career crash and fall, this happened all within, we'll say, 2 years.
Some of these names on the list obviously polarizing. I'm looking at Donald Trump, I'm talking about Elon Musk, but I mean, they all share a really similar theme of almost being like a phoenix in their industry, of burning out a few years ago, rising up and becoming one of the top titans, the top most talked about people in the industry. In Donald Trump's case, Times Person of the Year. So are there any other notable stories worth mentioning from the list?
Yeah, I think the couple stand out, right? I think the lack of female representation really stood out to me. I don't think, been a great number or a big number of females that we've put on our most notable crashes, but I think a lot about, we were talking about retail earlier, right? The DTC boom, right? The Glossiers, the Away, the Nasty Gals that really saw the boom, and then the era of the girl boss kind of fall down. But we don't seem to be seeing that level of comeback, right? All of these women have gone back to kind of start new companies, but they haven't received venture funding to the levels of, let's say, Pathak has for his new startup. And so I think that's a really interesting kind of trend to note is, okay, we have career crashes, right? What is the ability that, different systems, funders, the political kind of machine, right, allowing different business leaders to kind of come back to the top? I think that's one big trend that stood out to me. The other one, right, is kind of the cyclical nature. So politics every 4 years. We'll see who stands up about that. Bitcoin and FinTech, right, all of this funding. And I think for crypto specifically, it's just so cyclical that we'll see. Who knows, like maybe next year, Michael Saylor will be in our career crashes list. It's not too long ago that we had Sam Bankman-Fried, and last year we had CZ from finance, right? And so I think it's very much, and this is why we do these lists yearly, it's very much a sign of the times, and what's going on in that specific year.
And speaking of controversial people, there's someone in the media who really is always unapologetically themselves, love them or hate them, and that is Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports, also a famous pizza reviewer. Talk to us about his addition to the list.
Yeah, so Dave Portnoy, again, as you mentioned, is a controversial figure, whether you like him or not. But he really stood out to us this year just because of his ownership, right? And so Barstool Sports was sold to a casino gambling company called Penn Entertainment, beginning of 2023, for about a little over 500 million. That company is now back on the hands of, he's called by his supporters El Presidente of Barstool Sports. So that's now back in his hands. In the beginning of the year, longtime Barstool CEO Erica Ayers-Badan, announced that she was stepping off. She's now the CEO of Food Media, or Food 52, which means that Dave is, back in power, back as CEO. I think very interesting time to be it. He's been bringing a lot of different sponsorships into the program, DraftKings being kind of the main one. All of his talent has signed with UTA, one of the most reputable talent agencies, and doing kind of a big partnership with Rumble. Again, we see that pro-Trump kind of link. Rumble is a YouTube competitor that's like very largely backed by Peter Thiel and JD Vance. And so we see that kind of association that maybe also helped with the lift, although that's, I think up to interpretation still. And so, yeah, I think he's just, coming back to Barstool's. Barstool's is still not yet profitable, as, per the latest information that we know, just based on filings. And so I think that's the big question is we'll see is like, can, Dave really bring Barstool back up into, a larger media company? The podcast spacing as a whole is getting more and more competitive. And I think it's a space that a lot of people are paying more attention now. After the election, Joe Rogan really had a big sway. Alex Cooper with Call Her Daddy, and having Vice President Kamala Harris on. So it's a time where Barstool Sports, I think, is very well positioned to kind of capitalize on it. Alex Cooper is a Barstool Sports alum. That's where she started her career. But I think we'll see, where Dave goes. And I think on the more personal side, I do think it's important to mention, right? He earned a lot of brownie points for kind of posting and adopting his new rescue dog, Miss Peaches. And so maybe that swayed a little bit of his defectors, into his side, and kind of, we'll see what the repercussions are on Barstool Sports based on that positive association.
Maria, I appreciate your reporting, and I'm excited to follow these comebacks into 2025 and see if, they make the list again next year or what their careers look like. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.